Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. French President Emmanuel Macron has wrapped up a 3-day state visit to China. He did the rounds in the Guangzhou University on Friday after a trilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Beijing. So what's next for China-French relations? What is now the focus of relations between China and the EU? And what are the prospects of stable long-term relations amid global challenges? Before we loop in our panelists, take a look at this.
A new chapter of China's relations with France and the European Union. Macron said China and France need closer cooperation on issues of common concerns so as to benefit the two peoples and the world.
We, France and China, have a lot to do together. A lot to do in terms of overcoming challenges faced by multiple generations, and recognizing the ecological transition, and solving the challenge of climate change, and ensuring the protection of biodiversity.
Chinese President Xi Jinping said China is prepared to step up cooperation with the EU, spanning various areas that will have universal benefits.
We are ready to work with the EU to follow the general direction and main keynote of the development of China-EU relations well, comprehensively restart exchanges at all levels, activate mutually beneficial cooperation in various fields, remove disturbances and challenges, and inject new impetus into the development of China-EU relations and world peace and stability.
On another topic of the meeting, von der Leyen stresses China's role in bringing peace to the Ukraine crisis.
China's position on this is crucial for the European Union. As a member of the UN Security Council, there is a big responsibility, and we expect that China will play its role and promote a just peace, one that respects Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, one of the cornerstones of the UN Charter.
This year marks the 20th anniversary of the China-EU Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. It's important for the two sides to do their part in a multilateral world.
For more on China-France ties and China-EU relations in Brussels, Fraser Cameron, Senior Advisor with the European Policy Center in Beijing, Professor Wang Yiwei, Rang Monet Chair Professor with the Director, also the Director of the Center for European Studies at Renmin University of China. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Now, Mr. Cameron, you are reading all of this from Brussels, but also as a European yourself. So how do you see the very rich, shall I say, bilateral joint communique between China and France after the 3-day state visit by the French president?
Well, I think it's a very substantial communique. The first thing I'd say is important after the years of the pandemic when leaders simply couldn't physically meet together, that they did get together, spent a long time, person to person, discussing today's international issues. And that in itself, I think, is really important. And when it comes to the communique, I was frankly quite surprised how rich the communique was in terms of what it covered, in terms of China's support for European integration, for the EU-China strategic partnership agenda, and also in terms of cooperating on the whole range of international issues, above all Ukraine. So I think it was a very successful meeting between Macron and Xi, and I think it was also useful that von der Leyen was with Macron and made it a genuine European affair as well.
Let's focus on China-France at this moment before we move on to China-European relations. Professor Wang, also to you, this joint communique in Chinese version just came out, fresh out of the print. Actually, I'm holding it right now. So many pages. One could tell rich content over there. I was trying to read between the lines and also through the lines, a lot of things to cover. First of all, very important to resume the mechanism of a dialogue and high-level discussions mechanism.
I think it's not just a resume of the China-French strategic partnership, but even France as a pioneer leading the relations with the People's Republic of China. First, the Western country recognized People's Republic of China, so the diplomatic relations. Next year, we will celebrate the 60 years anniversary. And also, President Xi summarized this China-French diplomatic types spirit. Firstly, is independent, right? General de Gaulle, independent foreign policy with China, and given the U.S. press during that time. Second is more mutual respect. I think that's very important. As a two leading cultural and permanent member of United Nations Security Council, the mutual respect is very important. Thirdly, is strategic guidelines and looks very long term and strategically and mutual benefit. Not just the benefit bilaterally, even multilaterally, China and Western countries, now China-EU relations, benefit from the China-French comprehensive strategic partnership.
Now, Mr. Cameron, I'm sure you have also been reading the joint communique in different languages. According to the version that I got in Chinese, the very first part of it is made of about 16 points, 16 points. And among them, the first 6 are mainly about China-French ties itself. Meanwhile, from 7th to the 16th point, they're mainly about how China and France will be able to work together on the international stage, whether it is about the conflicts and the wars that is going on in the world, or about the role as permanent member of the UN Security Council, or the roles of how to avoid nuclear wars, and at the same time, how to be responsible players, good examples for the others. So how do you see, during the first chapter of this joint communique, so much about China and France can do together internationally, not just bilaterally?
Well, as you said, they are 2 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, so they have a joint responsibility for international peace. And I think that the communique sets out what are the current key areas in terms of where they want to cooperate. And of course, this touches key issues for Europe, such as the situation in Ukraine, and especially the situation of the nuclear reactor in Ukraine. That was specifically mentioned in the communique, that armed forces should not do anything to damage that facility. And then it covers a range of other issues, from North Korea through Syria to Iran, support for the joint comprehensive peace arrangement with Iran. So I think it reiterates the importance that Paris and Beijing have in the world and sets out to the rest of the world their plan for dealing with it.
Professor Wang, also your thoughts?
Well, these 51 articles of the joint statement are very fruitful. That's, I think, the true strategic partnership. So you mentioned not just a bilateral and also China-European Union, and about global issues.
Right.
Talk about very globally, hotspots, and also AI, digital economy, energy, nuclear, civilian use. So I think that's France as with a pioneer of the Renaissance of the Western civilization. And China, of course, is one of the representatives of the Eastern civilization. In dealing with today so many challenges, difficulties, we need the wisdom, we need civilization, we need independent strategic views to work together. I think that's very encouraging with other China, the Western relations who can be learned from that.
Of course, all of this is taking place at a time when the international geopolitical situation is getting ever more complicated as we speak. And we are also going to see more groupings, quote unquote, as some analysts suggest. Mr. Cameron, tell me more about what does this document suggest about France as one of those important European nations aspire to achieve with the second largest economy in the world?
Well, France has always sought to play an important international role, both in itself during the period of General de Gaulle and then increasingly in its membership through the European Union. And France now, I think, under Macron, has the most experienced leader internationally in the EU. So it's quite natural that he should play this prominent role. And of course, many interests are very similar between what France wants to see and what the European Union wants to see.
Right.
I think specifically here, this document sets out a roadmap, if you like, after the years when there was no opportunity to meet. That the two sides now are able to sit down and set out what they want to do together. And that's really the importance of this document.
Right. I want to go on to talk about the 16 points regarding, political and strategic relations. But actually, I have to rush up because there are a lot of contents among the 51 points. The other thing is about economic cooperation, very important, even mentioning about the 5G cooperation. Of course, with the international standards and also security concerns being counted in. Meanwhile, cooperation between China and France for Airbus, 160 planes between China and France in terms of planes purchasing. So once again, how significant are those? Those are usually under the spotlight, isn't it? At least for the media. Mr. Cameron.
Well, no, I think traditionally the leaders from Germany, France take a large business delegation with them, and often there are deals that are signed on the sidelines of these summits, and the Airbus purchase was planned some time ago.
Right.
But I think what's really important is that the two sides reaffirm their commitment to the WTO, to the internationalization of trade in general, and to working together on the whole range of new international issues, which you have just mentioned, including standards in digital and so on.
Low carbon as well, Professor Wang, I want to go to you about that as well. The new energy transformation that both countries are aspiring to, and they are working on it, especially given the potential of economic growth of these two countries. Your thoughts?
I think this joint statement will indicate that China is not a so-called challenge and threat or rival to France or in general the European Union, but a solution or partner to help European and French dual translation from digital and green translation. So much focus on the civilian nuclear plant and also third-party market, and also for green and low carbon energy. I think that's very fruitful. As also we said, von der Leyen meet President Xi also highlights that China actually is a help to Europeans' comparative advantage and inflation, energy crisis. China is a hope, it's not a threat.
Talking about China and the European Union, the year 2023 actually marks the 20th anniversary of the establishment of comprehensive strategic partnership between China and the European Union. Over the 2 decades, China and the EU have become each other's second largest trading partner. Of course, things are evolving right now as we speak. More and more European companies have got into Chinese market. Jörg Wuttke, president of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, recently shared his views on how well European companies are doing in the Chinese market and his thoughts on the prospects. Take a listen.
And then, first and foremost, I think for many of us, it is the demanding, sophisticated urban Chinese consumer. They are not always brand loyal, which keeps us on our toes in a way that cars, for example, get developed under the concept not of moving from A to B, but as a matter of fact, to have a computer on wheel. So European companies operating in China are basically in a fitness center. They are operating here, learning from the Chinese consumer where they have to make new adjustments and amendments. And that, of course, can be replicated in their global business. So in many ways, we have to be here in order to actually grow with the Chinese consumer in order to get the products deep into the 21st century, where we think we can still make a difference and make better products.
Jörg Wuttke from the EU Chamber of Commerce in China. 18 cooperation agreements, in fact, have been already signed on Thursday at the 5th meeting of the China-France Business Council, including green development, innovation, aviation, and new energy. So there are a lot of areas for cooperation to come. Having said that, though, Mr. Cameron, sitting where you are in Brussels, how do you see the latest interaction between Beijing and Brussels with the participation of Paris, in fact, bring new momentum about the synergy and interactions, the way to go?
Well, I think as the communique says, and von der Leyen indicated, we want to continue this open relationship in terms of trade and investment with China. But they're also doing it with open eyes. There are certain pressures from the United States, for example. There are also internal pressures in the European Union, which say one has to sort of watch out that you're not simply putting all your eggs in one basket. So although there's no talk of decoupling from China, there's a talk von der Leyen's language of de-risking, which means that we have to look at alternative supplies in terms of critical materials. So that is where the debate is going. But as Jörg Wutke said, European companies have done very well in China and expect to do well in the future, as do Chinese companies in Europe. So I think the prospects are actually pretty good in terms of a long-term relationship.
Professor Wang, there are a lot of difference actually between facts and opinions. We have heard a lot of rhetorics in the media, for example, or by politicians, but when it comes to real facts as to what is the synergy, what is likely to be the future, and how we plan for the future, those have to be concrete and specific. Tell me more about your thoughts between China and the EU, for example.
I think this time President von der Leyen's visit is also is between making up. Last year, she should accompany President Michel to visit it jointly, but it's a makeup. But also prepare for the China-EU summit maybe in June. China is a rotating presidency. So this also indicated China and the EU cooperation restart back to the normal, and China-European Union high-level trade and economic dialogue and other mechanisms will also resume. It's a very good signal. And also send a signal that China actually can cooperate with Europe to solve their own problems, like energy crisis and inflation and the Ukraine crisis. It's not hijacked by Ukraine crisis and also hijacked by Luxembourg before, and impact too much by the U.S. so-called decouple. Today, Ukraine, tomorrow, Taiwan. So they should have independent foreign policy with China. I think that's a very good result.
Ms. Cameron, things are evolving very fast. You know, the thing that we check today might be very different from how things would go 2 weeks from now. And of course, the same logic also apply to 2 weeks ago. So how do you see politicians at this critical juncture could have the wisdom to be able to see through things and be able to focus on the real trends so that their constituencies are not going to waste the time, while at the same time have huge potential to come?
Well, that's a very difficult question.
It's a trillion-dollar question, I guess.
In Europe, everyone has been impacted by the war in Ukraine because it sparked an energy crisis, it sparked inflation, it sparked about fear of a general war in Europe. So that is the number one priority. And that's why it was important that I think we set out in that communique some of the key principles in terms of respect for the United Nations Charter, no nuclear war, etc. That is, I think, important to reiterate that. And you've had a series of international leaders going to Beijing, and more will be coming. I think the High Representative of the EU, Mr. Borrell, is going, the German Foreign Minister is going, and they will be seeking also to try and see how they could work with China in terms of trying to influence Russia, because until Russia changes course, I don't see we're going to be able to move forward very much in terms of peace and security.
All right. A lot of things that needs to be discussed. That is why the mechanism of dialogue and exchanges need to start as soon as possible, as high level, as in-depth as possible. There are a lot of things to discuss, and certainly as a result of that, hopefully empathy and understanding can be created for all sides. Having said that, though, thank you so much for both of you. Fraser Cameron in Brussels and Wang Yiwei with us in the Beijing studio. Appreciate it.